Welcome to our Friday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today I'm ending my 4th week of teaching on how to find, follow, and fulfill God's will. This was actually a 3-part series on how to find, follow, and fulfill God's will. And I tell you, I've said so many things. These are truths that have just literally transformed my life. These are things that I live by every single day of my life. These are foundational principles that govern and control my walk with the Lord and how I follow the Lord. And you know, I'm not a perfect example, but I can truthfully tell you that God has led me in ways that are just miraculous. We're seeing things happen in my life that if somebody would have prophesied these things to me back 40 years ago, I would have thought, you're crazy. How's this ever going to come to pass? And yet I've followed God and I am seeing the will of God come to pass in my life. So I'm sharing with you things that are working in my life, and I know that they'll work for you. So again, let me just say that we have CDs and DVDs here, and so anyway, please get these materials, and we'll be announcing that at the end of the program. Yesterday I was using Psalms chapter 37, verse 4, that says, "Delight yourself also in the Lord, and He shall give you the desires of your heart." And I was sharing that that isn't saying that He'll just give you whatever you want, but when you delight yourself in the Lord, He puts His desires in your heart. He changes your want to. He changes your desires. And you, if you are truly delighting yourself in the Lord, which probably I could spend a lot more time explaining that, but if God is first in your life, if you're seeking Him and loving Him above everything else, then you can follow what you desire to do. Some people think, no, you could never just follow your own desires. Well, that's if you're carnal. That's if you are living your life for yourself and not seeking God. And if you are living like that, well then no, you can't follow the desires of your heart. But if you are delighting yourself in the Lord, He will put His desires in your heart and you can follow those desires. That's how God led me to be on television. That's how God led me to start our Charis Bible College. That's how God has led me to move from one place to another when I was pastoring churches and things, is through the desires of my heart. Praise God. That is awesome. Let me share another verse with you that it's really the same thing. It's just a different way of putting it. But in Colossians 3:15, it says, "Let the peace of God rule in your heart, to the which also you are called in one body, and be ye thankful." This says, let the peace of God rule in your heart. The word for rule here is the word that we get our English word umpire from. In other words, you just have to let peace be the umpire, the official that makes the call. And you need to follow what you have peace in your heart about. You know, this is something that I learned way back in the very beginning. 1968 is when the Lord first touched my life. And when I had that experience with the Lord on March the 23rd, 1968, I mean immediately my desires changed. I was in college at that time, and I was in my 2nd semester of college. I had just started. I had at least 4 years of college lined up. I had a deferment from the draft as long as I stayed in school. I was getting money from the government as long as I stayed in school. I had the acceptance of my family and of my friends as long as I stayed in school. But when I had this encounter with the Lord and when I truly delighted myself in the Lord and put God first, immediately, I mean the next day, I couldn't stand the thought of going back to college, secular college. I just knew that God had a purpose for my life, that what I was going to learn in secular college wouldn't prepare me for it, and I immediately hated the thought of going back to school. I kept going through the motions for a period of time, but I never made a class. I was witnessing to people. I was so excited about the Lord that I'd start witnessing to someone and it'd be time for the class, and I couldn't just quit witnessing to them and let them go to hell because it was time for me to go to class. So I'd keep talking to them, and then by the time I got through with them, the class was mostly over, so I'd go find somebody else. And then when it was time to go to the next class, I was in the midst of talking to somebody. So for 2 months, I went like that, and I just never made a class, and I decided that I'd just quit because I'd lost my desire for school. Remember that if I quit school, I was going to be drafted. I lost money from the government. A lot of my family and friends thought that I'd gone crazy. So there was a lot of downside to quitting. And when I announced that I was going to quit school, my mother just couldn't believe that that was God. She actually sicked a couple of preachers on me that started telling me that this isn't God, that God isn't leading you to do this. And anyway, long story, but I stayed in school and went ahead and finished the school year and took the exams just to satisfy my mother. This is back before I was married, but I hated it the whole time. And finally, one night I was over at a friend's house and we were studying and we read Romans 14:23 that says, "For whatsoever is not of faith is sin." And that verse just jumped off the page at me. And I realized that if you aren't acting and doing things in faith, that it's sin. I had never seen that before. I thought sin was going out and committing adultery, lying or stealing or some of these things. But just not being in faith, that was sin. When I saw that, there was this immediate conflict because in my heart, I didn't feel like I was supposed to be in school. And I was doing it only to satisfy some people. And when I saw that, I said, man, I am not going to be in sin tomorrow. I'm going to go home and I'm going to find out if this is God telling me to quit school or if it's just me. And I am going to make a decision tonight, and tomorrow when I get up, I am not going to be in sin. I am going to be doing what God told me to do. So I left early. I went home and I just started praying and saying, God, I've got to know, is this lack of desire for being in secular college that I have, is that you or is that just me? Is this the flesh? How do I tell if this desire is from you? And the scripture that God led me to was Colossians 3:15. Let the peace of God rule in your heart. Over in Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 and 23, it says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. Against such there is no law. And so that is saying that in your born-again spirit, you have love, joy, and peace. It's always there. You don't always feel the peace of God, but it's always there. And if you can set aside all of the distractions that occupy you and the fears and the things that are spoken to you, and if you can just focus on God, your heart always knows what's the right thing to do. And you will, in your heart, on a heart level, you will have peace about what God's will is. Man, I could spend a lot more time verifying that from Scriptures, but that is absolutely true. In your spirit, you have love, joy, and peace. Specifically, I'm talking about peace. And you always have peace about what God is leading you to do. You will always have turmoil, a holy turmoil, a holy dissatisfaction when you are being led to do something that isn't God's will. You know, I had to make a decision just yesterday. I was talking to some of my staff, and I had to make a decision about somebody we were going to hire to run a portion of our ministry. And we had 3 different people that we had interviewed, and I just had a peace about one. I didn't have peace about another. And this other person was actually higher recommended by other people, but I didn't have peace about it. And you know what? I put this into practice in my life and in my ministry yesterday. And it's something I live by every single day. You have a peace. When you are following God's will, there will be a supernatural peace that goes along with it. If there's not peace, then you let the peace rule in your heart. You follow peace. And yet, sad to say, most of us have been more taught to follow logic. Like going back to this situation when the Lord first spoke this verse to me, I was in secular school. I was getting $350 a month from the government if I stayed in school. It made sense. It was logical to stay in school and get that schooling paid for. I also had a deferment from the draft as long as I stayed in school. It made a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of sense to stay in school and avoid the draft. I also was accepted by all my friends and by my family as long as I stayed in school. But when I even toyed with the thought of quitting school, man, I got a lot of criticism. And so, you know what? Logically, there was no reason for me to quit school except that I didn't have a desire for it anymore. I didn't feel peace about it. And so I had to make a decision. I said, I'm not going to be in sin tomorrow. I am going to find out. And as I was praying and asking God for direction, He gave me this verse, and He basically told me, you let the peace of God rule in your heart, umpire in your heart. And so I said, all right, God, I'm going to do that. How do I do it? I sat down and considered my options, staying in school or quitting school. And as I thought about these options, if I thought about quitting school, I didn't feel peace about getting drafted and going to Vietnam and potentially getting killed or maimed. I didn't feel peace about people telling me that I was of the devil and that I was missing God. I didn't feel peace about losing $350 a month support from the government. I didn't feel total peace, but when I thought about staying in school, I felt zero peace. I mean, there wasn't any desire whatsoever. I hated it. I could spend an hour telling you about dreams that I had, reoccurring nightmares that I had about being in school. And I know that some of you think, man, I'm making a big deal out of this. For me, at 18 years of age, it was a big deal. And I felt zero peace. And so based on this scripture, it says, let the peace of God rule, umpire. I thought about like our sport of baseball. When you throw the ball, did you know that the home plate umpire, he just has to make a decision, and he has to call that either a ball or a strike. He can't sit there and say, well, I'm not sure. Let's just play it over, or let's not call that one anything. No, an umpire doesn't have the luxury of saying, play it over, do it over, I'll just forget that one. No, you have to make a decision. And even if you're wrong, you have to make a decision. And so the Lord reminded me of that, and I said, all right, I'm going to make a decision. Which one is it? Well, I didn't know for sure. I didn't feel total peace about quitting school, but I felt zero peace about staying in secular college. And so based on this verse, which also corresponds to Psalms 37:4, delight yourself also in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart. I just said, Father, to the best of my ability, I am going to follow the peace that's in my heart. I don't feel total peace about quitting school, but I feel zero peace about staying in school. So I'm going to act on what you said, and I make my decision that you are calling me to leave school, and whatever the consequences are, I'll live with them. And I made that decision, and I went to bed. The next morning I got up, and I was going to have to act on that decision that I made, and I was going to have to tell people. So I had talked to a lot of people. And anyway, there was 3 people that were really special in my life. I hadn't got time on today's program to give all of the explanation, but these were 3 people that I had shared my lack of desire to be in school and my desire to get out and just devote myself to seeking God 24 hours a day, 100%. And when I shared this with them, they turned on me with a vengeance. I mean, people that were special in my life, people that were really important to me, and they came out viciously against me. One of them was actually a high school teacher that I'd had, this woman named Mrs. Ellis. And I just respected this woman. She was a Christian lady. She stood for her Christian faith. And I had talked to her and told her about my experience that I had with the Lord and how I felt God was leading me to quit school. And she was a friend of my mother. My mother was a school teacher, and they were both teachers together. And so Mrs. Ellis, I'm sure, thinking that she was supporting my mother, just turned on me and let me have it, that this was not God. I was missing God. This was going to be the biggest mistake of my life. And she just let me have it. I mean, rebuked me. So after I had made this decision and was letting the peace of God rule in my heart, I went to these 3 people who were very influential in my life and who I respected, and they were the 3 that had been probably the most critical of me. I went to them just to gauge their reaction, just to see what was happening. And I remember walking in to see Miss Ellis, and I walked in and I said, well, I've made my decision about school. And she said, what is it? And I said, God told me to quit school. And I said, I'm going to quit school, and I don't care if I get drafted. I don't care what happens. I don't care what the consequences are. I'm following God, and this is what God is telling me to do based on Colossians 3:15. And I just braced myself, waiting on her criticism. And instead, she was silent for a while, and she got tears in her eyes. And she says, I'd give anything to be in your shape, in your situation. And I was shocked. I said, you would? And she said, you know, I don't know how old she was, 50 or whatever at that time or something. And she says, I've lived my whole life basically hoping that what I'm doing is pleasing God, but I don't know for sure that I'm doing what God's called me to do. And she says, I'd give anything to be 18 knowing that God was speaking to me and leading me. And man, I left that place just nearly floating because you know what? I had taken a stand. I had started moving in this direction and I already had a confirmation. I went to those 2 other people that day. Every one of them just turned around and he says, I believe that's God. And I never doubted it. And it, you know, in retrospect, I look back, that was one of the most important decisions I ever made in my life. It set me on a course. I mean, I got drafted. I was sent to Vietnam. I grew up. I learned things. It's just like I was going down a road this direction. And when I made that decision, it turned my life in a totally opposite direction. And I would have to have backslid on God to keep from being where I am today. And that was one of the decisions that started all of these things in process. I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, there's people watching this program right now. You could be in other countries. This program's seen all around the world. You could be in another country, and it could be a totally different set of circumstances. It may have nothing to do with school. It could be your job. It could be who you're going to marry. It could be, you know, where you live. It could be, are you called into the ministry? Are you called to be a missionary? It could be a million different things. You could have a different culture, totally different background, but these exact same principles hold true for every single person watching this program. And I'm just telling you right now, in the name of the Lord, that some of you are in sin based on Romans 14:23. Whatsoever is not of faith is sin. You've been dangling in between options of things to do. And you're just somehow or another praying and waiting on God to send a bolt of lightning or circumstances to direct you and hoping that somehow or another God will just sovereignly make it work out. I'm telling you, there's a better way. And the better way is for you to recognize that you have peace in your born-again spirit. And you just let the peace of God rule in your heart. You delight yourself in the Lord, and then you follow those desires. What is it that you feel peace about? What is it that you have desires for? Follow them. Man, that sounds too simple. It sounds like, no, it couldn't be this simple. It is that simple if you're really putting God first. You know, I also pastored a church in Pritchett, Colorado. And when I was there, it's a long story, but we had, I think it was 2 or 3 elders in that church when I first went there, but they were custom combiners. And so they would follow the wheat harvest, and they would be gone for 4 or 5 months out of the year. When I first went there, I went there in January of, I guess that would have been like 78 is when I moved there. And they stayed there until like May or something. But then as May was approaching and they started following the wheat harvest, they said, we need an elder that is present here with you in case you need some help running the church or something. And so I said, well, I'm not against that. I didn't mind having an elder, somebody that the body had recognized and put in. And when they suggested people, they named this one person there was no reason for me not to like this person. This person was one of the very first ones that accepted me when I came there. They had supported me. They had been nice to me. There wasn't a single reason for me to not like this person. But when they suggested him, I said, no, I just don't think he's supposed to be an elder. And they said, why not? And you know, one of the problems with guys, women, I believe, are more intuitive and operate more on an instinct than guys do. Guys have to be real logical, and they wanted a logical reason. They wanted me to detail the reasons why I didn't like this guy. And I didn't have any reasons. Everything I knew about him, I liked him. I said, I don't have anything against him. I just don't feel peace about it. And anyway, they kept pressuring me, and as time was drawing closer, they threw a couple of other names in the hat. Nothing was working out. And they finally came back to this one man. We believe he's supposed to be the elder. What do you have against him? And because of their pressure, I went ahead and put a guy in as an elder who I didn't feel good about doing it. But I went ahead and did it. They left on wheat harvest, and I mean the moment they were out of town, this guy turned into Satan personified. He stood up in the church service, accused me of lying, stealing, getting drunk, having sex outside of marriage, doing dope, stealing money. I mean, he just turned into the devil. He started accusing me, and he became a thorn in my flesh. And as soon as that happened, I said, I knew I didn't feel peace about this. And I made a decision right then. I said, never again am I going to violate this peace that I feel in my heart. If I don't feel peace about something, maybe I'm wrong, but I am not going to go ahead and do something that I don't feel peace about. And you know, that has stood me in good stead for decades. And I have followed that and made decisions, and I tell you, it has been God. Just every time I take a stand based on the peace that I feel in my heart, this is God leading me. This is how you follow God. I'm talking about how to find God's will, how to follow God's will. This is how you follow God. You let the peace of God rule in your heart. You delight yourself in the Lord, and He puts His desires in your heart. And I just follow this constantly. I make all kinds of important decisions based on this. You know, I've mentioned this a number of times, but we're building a Bible college campus. It's just a big thing in my life right now. And God has spoken some things to me about how I need to get with it. I need to quit limiting Him. We're going to have a huge increase in finances for me to fulfill this. And you know what? I just don't feel peace about continuing along at a slow pace. I feel peace about ramping this up and putting myself in a position where, you know what, I could be vulnerable. Man, if the finances don't come in, I could be in trouble. But you know what? That's what I feel peace about. It's counter to logic. But I bet you every one of you have experienced this. I bet you've had decisions that you've had to make before, and you had one decision that looked logical, but another one that you felt good about. You let people influence you. You went with logic, and as soon as you did it, things didn't work out, and you said, I knew I wasn't supposed to do that. How did you know? It was this peace. You didn't feel peace about it. Man, if you don't feel peace about something, don't do it. Either go to the Lord and get your heart right with God so that you'll start feeling the peace of God, or that might be God that is giving you that holy dissatisfaction.
Bedankt voor het kijken naar Gospel Truth met Andrew Wommack. Heb je vragen naar aanleiding van deze aflevering? We staan voor je klaar om ze te beantwoorden. Bel voor al je geloofsvragen met onze hulplijn. Een team van betrokken en ervaren mensen staat klaar voor goed Bijbels advies en om samen met je te bidden voor jouw situatie. Dus schroom niet om te bellen. 035 533 8875. Buiten de openingstijden kun je een voicemail inspreken en we nemen dan zo snel mogelijk contact met je op. Wacht niet langer met je geloofsvragen. Bel met de hulplijn 035 533 8875.